Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our second Mind Left interview of June. Today, I have Molly Gebrian, and she's the viola professor at University of Arizona. And before I give her a chance to introduce herself, I just want to um, let everyone know that I first was introduced to Molly through a Youth Orchestra Los Angeles meeting, where she gave a fantastic presentation about neuroscience in music, and it was over an hour. It was a pretty long presentation, but I think it was one of the few presentations where you pay attention every single second because of how important it was. So I knew I had to ask her to be interviewed. Molly, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. So can you share sort of your story of how you got interested in neuroscience and music?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Oberlin College and Conservatory for undergrad, and I majored in viola and neuroscience there. Viola, obviously, because I'm a violist, but the neuroscience was just for fun. I took a freshman class on neuroscience. I thought it was absolutely fascinating, and I wanted to learn more about it. So I had gone into Oberlin knowing I wanted to do double degree, but I didn't quite know what. But I majored in neuroscience. And then after Oberlin, I went to New England Conservatory for my master's, and I didn't plan to continue with neuroscience. It was just like an interesting thing that I had done as an undergrad. But then I got to NEC and I felt just weird, and I didn't really know why. But my roommate at NEC, who had also been at Oberlin with me, she's a violinist, she participated in a study at Harvard looking at musicians versus non-musicians' brains. And she came home from that and was like all excited about it, and was sharing it with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I really miss this. Like, oh no, I'm at NEC. What am I going to do? And so I was able to do a number of independent studies there looking at music and neuroscience. And then when I got to Rice, which is where I did my doctorate, again, obviously in viola, I was back at university. So I was able to take graduate level neuroscience classes while I was there. I worked in a lab. I did a whole bunch of stuff at Rice with neuroscience, even though technically I was only getting my doctorate in viola. So that's sort of my background in a nutshell.
Mhm. I want to start off by getting actually a little bit off topic from
Sure.
the script I had. You mentioned that you went to New England Conservatory and Rice, which are fantastic schools. And I know New England Conservatory is just a conservatory, even though it does have programs with Harvard and Tufts.
Yeah.
And Rice is probably one of the most intensive uh, colleges for music in the country. I know that the cello faculty is amazing. So what are the mental health resources like there? And I'm sure it's very competitive for everyone. And do you think it hindered you at all?
So that's a great question, and I don't have a good answer. I have no idea what the mental health resources are. I'm especially at NEC. I haven't a clue what they are. I know at Rice that they have a counseling center like any sort of college or university, that students can, you can see someone in the counseling center for free, kind of whenever you want. I have no clue what is offered, if anything, at NEC. I mean, I was at both of those schools over a decade ago, so I'm sure it's very different now than it was then.
Mm, right, thank
Sorry,
you.
that's not helpful.
Well, anyways, getting back to something that you specialize in, neuroscience of practicing and performing. How do you believe this knowledge can be useful to a musician?
Yeah, I mean, we spend so much of our lives alone practicing, right? And we think that practicing is about training our bodies, right? Like our fingers or our hands or our lips if we're wind players or whatever. But actually, practicing is about training our brains. We don't do anything in life without our brains being in charge of it. And so, if you understand how the brain works and how the brain learns and how the brain like retains information, your practicing will be a lot more efficient and effective, and then you'll be a lot less frustrated and you'll feel better in the practice room and you'll have more time for other things in your life because you won't be spending like 10 million hours every day just practicing.
Mhm. Could you highlight some of those key findings that you found from that research on practicing?
Yeah, sure. How much time do you have? 20 hours? I'll say, I will say the most important things, if I had to narrow it down, actually, the first one is probably going to surprise you and your listeners, which is the importance of taking breaks. As especially as classical musicians, the sort of culture around practicing is like practice every single day, as many hours as you possibly can, like in big blocks of time. Like if you take breaks and you take time off, like you're lazy and you're not serious and whatever. And that is so counter to all of the research. we actually learn the most, or we make the most improvement when we're taking a break, which is like the most counterintuitive thing ever, right? You think while you're practicing, that's when you're improving. But when you take a break is when your brain actually takes all the stuff, all the information you gave it while you were practicing, and it does like actual physical reorganization so that when you come back, you're better able to do whatever it was you were working on. But if you don't take a break, like the brain can't do that. And so that would be the first thing, is like take breaks, lots of them, as often as possible. You're probably practicing too much in a given day. You're probably practicing too much at a stretch without a break. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say that kind of goes along with that is, as classical musicians, we are taught to organize our practice, like pick something and focus on that thing and like work on that thing and stick with it until you've like fixed it, and then like move on to something else. And that is also counter to how our brains learn. There's something called interleaved practice, sometimes called random practice, where you basically are constantly switching what you're doing pretty often in your practice, and you're constantly like coming back to things. And when you first hear about it, it sounds like so chaotic and unfocused. Like, just pick something and work on that thing. Don't keep like switching what you're doing and like returning to things. But actually, we learn faster and better if we work on it for a little bit and then do some other things and then come back and work on it some more and then some other things. So that's a really different way of practicing. I practice that way now because I know the research, but it's like every day it's like a conscious choice, because my tendency is just like pick one thing and stay there. But I know I'll learn faster if I don't do that.
Mhm.
Finally, I would say just a general thing. I think a lot of times as classical musicians, we will go into the practice room without a good plan and without a good like set of goals. And if you're practicing without a specific goal and without a specific plan, you're going to waste a lot of time. Even taking like literally 1 minute before you start practicing and thinking through, okay, what is hard about this piece for me? Where are the sections that I'm having the most trouble? What are some strategies I could use to solve that? Like literally taking 1 minute to do that thought process will make your practice session like so much more effective than if you don't do that.
Mhm. I want to circle back to what you were talking about, taking breaks and
Yeah,
not practicing too much, because I think that's a really interesting concept, especially because we all have our own sort of set amount of time that we can focus.
totally.
But generally, what do you think a good set amount of time is for a student to practice every single day?
So the research suggests that nobody can focus well the way we need to focus when we practice for more than about 4 to 5 hours per day. So anybody, any of your listeners that are practicing like 6, 7, 8 hours a day, like stop it. Like that's not effective. I on a heavy practice day for me is 4.5 hours. More likely, I'm gonna do 2 or 3. I have never practiced more than 5 hours in my life, and that was one day of my life. And I was like, okay, never, never again. That's too much. In terms of how much to practice at once in a given day without taking a break, there's something called ultradian rhythms, which are sort of related to circadian rhythms, which many people have heard of, the 24-hour like sleep-wake cycle. Ultradian rhythms are smaller cycles that happen throughout the day and night when we're sleeping. And they're about 2 hours, and there's about during the day there's about an hour and a half where we're like really focused, and then we start to fall off for like half an hour while we cycle out of it, and then we cycle back up. Most people have sort of noticed in themselves that like they'll be kind of sleepy at certain times of the day, right? And it's like hard to focus. That's because you're probably on the downswing of your ultradian cycle. And so if you're trying to practice for longer than like an hour, or at the most an hour and a half, without a pretty significant break, you're doing yourself a disservice.
How do you know when it's a good time to practice?
That's a great question too. Everybody is a little bit different. For me, I am the most focused and most alert in the morning, and I'm not a night person. That being said, you want to spread your practicing out throughout the day as much as you can. Do little bits with large breaks in between. Don't just practice for a block of time in the morning. So for me, because I focus the best in the morning, I try to do half an hour to an hour of practice on like the hardest stuff in the morning when I'm the most focused. And then I'll practice a little more in the afternoon sometime, and then I'll practice a little more in the evening sometime. So it's sort of across the whole day like that.
Mhm. And you were mentioning a lot about sleep. And
Mhm.
I know in your presentation and on your YouTube channel, there's a lot about sleep. And I think there's a book you recommended if you want to elaborate on that. And then also sort of give our viewers sort of some really quick tips on how they can improve their sleep and how that can help them with their mental health.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, sleep is so important for learning, for mental health, for everything. The book I recommended in the presentation is called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. He's one of the leading neuroscientists on the study of sleep. And in terms of learning and practicing, when we practice something during the day and then we get a full night of sleep, what the research shows is that you get a really significant boost in your performance the next day after a night of sleep, because the brain does all sorts of stuff. The brain, sleep is like the ultimate break, since we're talking about breaks. The brain does all sorts of stuff while we're sleeping to enhance our learning. And so if you want to sort of maximize your practice time, you have to maximize your sleep, making sure you prioritize sleep and get enough sleep. The other thing connecting sleep to mental health is it's been known for a long time that people that are struggling with anxiety or depression or any host of mental health struggles have disrupted sleep. But more recently, researchers have discovered that not getting enough sleep can cause mental health problems, can cause depression, anxiety, what have you. And so getting enough sleep and sleeping regularly on a regular schedule is one of the most powerful things you can do to protect your mental health.
Yeah. Um, you know, it sleep a lack of sleep can enhance those mental illnesses. But
Exactly.
what do you think like the greatest problem to classical musicians is that could be uh, enhanced by sleep?
Yeah, so many things. I think that, I mean, if you're getting enough sleep, you're going to learn faster, and that's going to make your practicing more efficient. If you're not getting enough sleep, your body is going to be tighter and you're not going to be as coordinated because your brain is slow. And so you're going to have a lot fewer sort of physical problems or coordination problems or like body control problems if you're getting enough sleep. So yeah, I mean, sleep is like, if you want like one magic thing that's going to fix all your practicing problems, address your sleep first. It won't fix everything, but that would be my advice. If you want to change one thing about your life, get enough sleep on a regular schedule.
You were talking about tension. I have a lot of
Yeah.
tension when I play, and
Mm.
I, I don't know for sure. I played a little bit of trumpet, a little bit of clarinet when I was younger, but I've noticed that I think string players face a lot more tension issues than wind players. And I think it's a little bit different for violins, violas versus cellos and basses, but it's something all classical musicians face. So can you sort of tell me how you think you can use neuroscience to release tension and maybe before you even start playing? I mean, it's easy to tell yourself like relax while you're
Right.
playing, but is there anything you can do before you actually start the practice sessions or before you actually go on stage that can make you more loose?
That's the wrong question. So I'm going to answer a different question, because I think what you asked is what everybody thinks, that like, if you do this one thing before you start practicing or right before you go on stage, you'll be loose and relaxed. And that's not how it works. Unfortunately, that would be amazing if that were the case, but that's not how it works. So when we play with excess tension, we have embedded a faulty muscle memory in our bodies of how to play. It's a muscle memory that involves excess tension. And just like if you embed some sort of bad habit of, you hold your bow in a really weird way, like that's a muscle memory that's faulty that you don't want. And if you have a really messed up bow hold, like you can't do like one thing before you go on stage and then go on stage and have a perfect bow hold, right? Like that wouldn't work that way because it's a bad habit. Tension is the same thing. And so to release tension and learn how to play, you have to retrain yourself how to play without tension and teach your body and teach your brain a new muscle memory. And that's something that takes time and persistence and attention while you're playing to the tension you're feeling in your body, and not allowing yourself to fall into your bad habits. So you are absolutely right that classical musicians tend to have a lot of excess tension in their playing, but that is sort of an everyday for years priority that needs to be like the top focus of your practicing in order to get rid of it. There's nothing you can do immediately before you start practicing or immediately before you go on stage that's going to address it if you're not persistent in addressing it every day in every part of your practicing.
It's reversing bad habits, is I think what you're saying.
That's exactly right. That you have this bad habit of tension and you're trying to teach your body a new habit, which is playing without tension, which involves creating new pathways in your brain. And that's something that takes time and persistence.
Do you think teachers teach their students to play without tension when they first get started? I personally started through YOLO, so it was like group classes. I didn't really get individual attention, but maybe I think most students do start with some sort of private training, and perhaps those teachers could do something to prevent them from having a lot of tension when
yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the gold standard, is you don't develop tension in the first place, because from the time you start, your teacher is really mindful of that. And I think that there are absolutely teachers out there who are fantastic at teaching little kids to play without tension. There are teachers that are not aware of that, right? It kind of runs the whole gamut. I would say these days there's so much more awareness of the necessity to play without tension, and sort of disciplines like Alexander technique or Feldenkrais or body mapping or things like this that can help musicians play with less tension. And so that is finding its way into teacher training, which means it's finding its way into teaching of small children. So it's definitely better than it used to be. Do we have a ways to go? Yeah.
This was sort of the question I asked before. I thought about a little bit, maybe rephrase it. A lot of tension is psychological, right?
Yes.
And so is there a way to sort of maybe give yourself affirmations or something in your own head that can release physical tension?
Yes and no. Again, if people want like this one thing that they can do like right before they start to play that's going to solve the problem. And yes, having affirmations and things you tell yourself can absolutely help you control your tension. Because we tend to get tense because we don't want to make mistakes or because we're worried about something. And if you realize like you're never going to play perfectly, you're a human being, it's okay to make mistakes. The world is not going to end if you do. That can help you stay sort of more in your body and less tense. That being said, that practice of positive self-talk and learning to, calm your body down with whatever you're thinking, that is also something that needs to be practiced on a daily basis as part of your regular training. If you just do it for the first time, like right before you go on stage, it's not really going to do anything for you. It has to be a regular part of your practicing, just like scales and whatever else you're doing on a regular basis.
Do you think that would be a good thing to incorporate in a mental practice, since you don't really need your instrument for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really funny when you mental practice, you can feel excess tension in your head. Like when you're imagining yourself playing, like you can feel like, wow, my bow arm is really tight, even though you're not moving or anything. And so in your head, you can imagine, okay, how would I play this and release that tension? And what would it feel like to play this without tension? And you can work that out in your head, and then it will translate to the instrument. Yeah, that's a great question.
How do you think you can convey tense moments in music without physically tensing up?
That's a really good question. I had an Alexander technique teacher once who said, the water boils, the pot does not. When you are playing intense music, the music is the water, you are the pot. If you're boiling water and the pot starts to boil, that's bad news, right? Your pot is disintegrating. If you as a musician are playing really intense music and that tension finds its way into your body, you can't actually convey the tension in the music because you're compromised in your ability to play. And so it can be a very weird disconnect at first to be playing very intense music, but have your body be very calm and relaxed. And it can feel like you're not being expressive because your body doesn't feel the emotion of the music, but it doesn't matter. What matters is how it comes across to the audience. And you're going to get that tension in the music across more successfully if you've learned how to keep your body calm.
That's great. Thank you. I want to move over back to neuroscience, and
Sure.
we were talking about mental practice and its role in enhancing both musical and performance. how can musicians effectively incorporate mental practice into their routine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I incorporate mental practice in a lot of different ways. I think anytime musicians want to practice and they can't because people are sleeping and they can't play, or they're traveling and they're on an airplane, or they're injured or something like that, mental practicing is a really effective way to still get work done and make progress. On a normal day-to-day basis, the way that I incorporate mental practicing is I go back and forth between mental practicing something and physically playing it. So I will, like, before I, start working on a new section in something I'm working on, I will practice it mentally first, make sure that I can hear it all, make sure I can feel myself playing it the way I want it to be. Anything that I can't quite imagine or anything I can't quite do in my head, I'll work it out in my head, and then I'll try it on the instrument. And then based on what I experience on the instrument, I'll go back and mental practice it a little bit more, and then I'll put it back on the instrument. So it's this constant cycle of sort of back and forth between the two.
Mm. Um, you know, it's easy to like say, oh, like practice now mentally, practice then physically. But I think we can all admit that sometimes we're not focused.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially mental practice, you need to be really focused because there isn't really anything holding you accountable unless you find methods to. But even if you do, it it doesn't necessarily hold you accountable. So I was looking at your YouTube channel, which by the way, we'll talk about later. Great videos, so much. It's gonna take a long time to watch all of them.
And they're really long too, but anyway.
Yeah. And I think you had a recent video actually talking about um the importance of, I guess, mindfulness and being able to focus.
Uh-huh.
And do you have any tips that sort of are related to neuroscience that can help you focus when you mental practice or physical practice?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, focus, the ability to focus is a skill. And right now I am not talking to people that are like that have ADHD. That's a different thing. But focus, being able to focus when you're practicing is a skill, and you can improve at skills, right? It's not something you either can do or can't do. And so what I recommend to people is, if you're having trouble focusing when you're practicing, either mental practicing or physical practicing, put on a timer for a very short amount of time, like literally 1 minute or 2 minutes, and put on the timer and decide what you're going to practice, how you're going to practice it, and then see if you can focus on practicing for just 1 minute or 2 minutes, however long you've set your timer. And just do little tiny increments like that where you're focused for that amount of time. Once whatever the time you've put on your timer is, once that gets easy, then increase it. So maybe if you started with 1 minute, then put it on 2 minutes. If you started with 2 minutes, maybe put it on 4 minutes or something like that. And gradually increase the length of time on your timer over time until you can focus for the amount of time that you want to. I never practice for more than 30 minutes without at least a 5-minute break. One, because that's better for your body. Two, because that's better for your brain. Three, because I don't feel like I can focus effectively the way I want to without a break after 30 minutes. So when I'm practicing, I always have a 30-minute timer on. And timer goes off and I'm done. I take a break.
Right. And that would sort of be, I think, blocked practicing. Would you call it that when you take a break?
No, so blocked versus random practicing is a different thing. So within that block of 30 minutes, I'm doing a variety of things. And like we were talking about a little bit before, random/interleaved practice is kind of going back and forth between different things. So within that 30 minutes, probably I'm practicing at least 3 or 4 different things and sort of rotating between them.
Oh, I see. But could you dive a little bit more into that, the random practice? I also wrote down serial practice and interleaved practice.
Yeah, sure. So random practice and interleaved practice are the same thing. They're just 2 words for exactly the same thing. So random practice, interleaved practice, whatever we want to call it, is that idea that we were talking about where you don't just focus on one thing for a big block of time, that you work on something for a little bit then you go work on something else, then you go work on some third thing, and then you come back to that first thing. And then maybe you go work on the third thing again and the second thing. It's a much more effective way to learn than just focusing on the first thing for a whole 30 minutes. Because every time you go away from something else and come back to it, you have to remember when you come back to it, wait, what was this thing I was practicing? How do I do this? And that further solidifies it in your brain. So when I practice, some people like to choose, say, 3 to 5 things, and within a 30-minute block, say, set a timer to go off every 5 minutes or every 3 minutes. And every 3 minutes, they switch what they're doing. So maybe they'll do the first thing, then the second thing, then the third thing, then the second thing again, then the first thing, then the third thing. I prefer to work on one thing for a little bit. Once I feel like I've reached a sort of stopping point, whatever that may be, I go work on something else, and I go work on something else, then I come back to my first thing. So it's not like rigid with the timer, it's just sort of how I feel. So yeah, within a 30-minute block, I'm working on a variety of different things because that's more effective than just picking one thing and only doing that.
Do you sort of plan on how you choose which routine to follow?
Yes, I always have a plan. I never ever start practicing without a plan.
And is it based off like performances you might have coming up, or?
It's based on where I am in my learning process of the music that I'm learning. It's based on sort of the totality of all the music I have to have in my hands at a given time. And it has to do with the proximity of all that music to a performance or performances. And so I'm going to be practicing something much differently if I'm like 3 weeks out from a performance, as if I'm, just starting and I have like 6 months till the concert or something like that.
Let's say you're just starting off with a new piece. Would you recommend starting off with mental practice or physical practice?
It depends. I do both in equal measure. I think when something is brand new, it can feel hard at first to only mental practice it because you don't have any physical experience playing it. Although I have done that definitely in my life, that I've done a ton of mental practice on it before I have ever played it on my instrument. I don't think it really matters.
How was it? Was it effective?
It was really effective, and actually it was weird. I had to learn a piece once. This was like, gosh, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And it's a long story, but I had to learn this thing only mental practicing. And I practiced it for probably like 2 months before I was able to actually play it on my viola. And when I actually played it for the first time, it felt like somebody had loaned me a body that already knew how to play it. Like, it was the weirdest thing. I had obviously been practicing it for 2 months, like mental practicing it, but I never like actually played it. But obviously I could play it well because I've been practicing. It was a really bizarre, it was a really bizarre experience.
So what routine did you take for practicing your new piece mentally?
There is no routine per se. I mean, I understand the word routine as a sort of set, a set sort of progression of things that you do, and practicing is a dynamic process that changes every single day and every single practice session. So when I was mental practicing that piece, I practiced it in exactly the same way I would practice, with my instrument. I started with the places that were the most challenging, and I broke them down into smaller chunks and individual steps. And I solidified each step in each chunk, and then I sort of put it in the larger framework of the piece. And then so I worked small to large sort of over time.
This is a little unrelated, but as a viola professor, do you think it's a good thing for students to learn a piece before like really listening to other people's interpretations so that they don't necessarily copy other people? Or do you think it's okay to get that inspiration beforehand?
I not only think it's okay to listen to recordings, I think it's imperative to listen to recordings. It's very weird to me that in the world of music, we tell students, don't listen to recordings. You're going to get influenced by that. The way that visual artists are trained is they go to the museum and they make copies of great artwork so that they learn how it's constructed. I think that, a really important part of any lesson you have with someone, they're going to demonstrate for you, right? Like, your teacher's always demonstrating. If you don't have demonstration on how it should sound, like, it's going to be really hard to learn how to play. A recording is a demonstration. So I think if you are only listening to one recording and you listen to that recording over and over and over and over and over again, that's not great because then you only have one interpretation. But I think that, unless you're premiering a piece or something, there's so many recordings of whatever you're working on. Go out and listen to as many as you can and notice, what do you like? What do you not like? Be really specific about what you like and what you don't like, and try to figure out, okay, how is this person doing this thing that I really like how it sounds? If you're not listening and you don't have good models for what you're aiming for, like, I don't know, to me that's like playing in the dark. Like how can you develop as an artist if you don't have models to look towards?
Yeah, great, thank you. We're almost out of time, and sort of a routine we have here is we like to give our guests a chance to sort of present what they offer. Usually we have directors or programs on, but I know you do have a YouTube channel and you have a lot of articles on your website. So would you like to introduce those?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Dr. Molly Gebrian, not at YouTube, but on YouTube. You just search my name. And I have a whole bunch of videos there on the science of practicing. They're organized into playlists and stuff. You can also see me play if you want, because I have, performance videos. On my website, all of my videos are up. I have a whole bunch of articles that I've written that you can read. I have podcasts where I've been a guest. I have probably other stuff I'm forgetting about, but lots of resources on my website. I also offer private one-on-one like practice coaching for any instrument. I work with people sort of all over the world. So if any of your listeners have interest in that, you can just get in touch with me and we'll set up a time. And yeah, I do like short, just like one-off things with people. They have like a very specific question. And then I have people that I've worked with for, years, where I see them, once a month or every 2 weeks or every week, whatever they want. We talk about practicing.
What's a good first video on your YouTube channel that our listeners can check out?
I would say the best one to start with is this. They're all in series and they're all like a series of videos. The best series I would say to start with is the one that's called What Musicians Can Learn About Practicing from Current Brain Research. I think that's what it's called. It has 5 videos in it, and that's sort of like an overview of a whole bunch of different topics. And then the rest of the videos after that, the rest of the video series are more specialized topics. So there's one on memorization, there's one on taking breaks, there's one on mental practicing, there's one on something called variable practicing. I can't remember all of them, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of series.
Great. Thank you, Molly, for coming on. I love it when I get to meet musicians who are involved with the science field, because I feel like science and math have always been my weakest subjects, and to get sort of this knowledge presented to me in a much more ideal way than the American school system is always great. So thank you for coming on. I'm definitely going to check out more of your YouTube videos. I've already watched a couple. And for everyone watching this video, we also have the Mind Left website. We have lots of articles, lots of resources on there as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This was fun.